Good evening and welcome to the Mount Gretna School of Art Lecture Series, hosted here in the Pennsylvania Chautauqua's Hall of Philosophy. I want to start by thanking a couple of our lecture sponsors. The big ones are the Arts for All partnership of the Foundation for Enhancing Communities, who specifically gave us a grant to help retain our online audience that we developed last summer, and Stinson Strout. I'm going to introduce Stephanie Pierce now, who came down from Brooklyn, New York today, where she teaches at FIT over in Manhattan, the Fashion Institute of Technology, in their art program, which we've had a couple students come through our program, and maybe even a couple here this summer, right? Cameron and Kayla. And she studied at the University of Washington for her MFA and the Art Institute of Boston for her BFA. And she did attend, I do remember, when I started the school, I didn't know if anybody out there would be excited about it that was teaching. And she and a handful of other professors around the country were jumped out of the woodwork that it was necessary. And for some of their students that had that kind of extra thirst. And I think that's partly because she attended a similar program, Yale Norfolk's program back in 1995. And she's been in some shows at Stephen Harvey, which I'd like to mention, Stephen Harvey Fine Arts Projects, just on the Lower East Side. Paradise Island was a group show, which you might find on his website. And Signal, which was a solo show at Stephen Harvey Fine Arts Project. She's had work printed in Harper's Magazine and The New Yorker, and has been the recipient of a Joan Mitchell Painting Prize grant. And she's our critic for the next couple of days, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be back here. I haven't been here in several years. The last time I came, it was 2017, but that was just a brief visit. But I was here in 2015 and taught a little bit, and it's just really nice to be back. This place is so great. And it's also the first thing I've done in person, and I know there's online people out there too, but this is the first in-person thing like this I've done since the pandemic. So it's nice to be in a room full of people and see faces instead of being in my studio looking at my computer screen and wondering, what do they think about what I'm saying? So I'm going to get started. I'm going to move through things chronologically, which is pretty standard. I started painting and drawing from life as a high school student in Memphis, Tennessee, where I grew up. I had an incredible mentor named Bill Hicks who taught at a public school and was, he kind of like set a fire in all of us. And I have several friends from that time who were serious practicing artists, with advanced careers. And I'm still friends with him, and he's still a very dear friend. But he taught us drawing and painting from life. And he taught us, we kind of had like a pre-college experience, learning painting, drawing, printmaking, sculpture, photo, kind of everything. So by the time we were, we had 3 years of that. And by the time we went to college, we had our foundation pretty set. And in that environment, it was like this healthy competitive environment where we were constantly feeding off of what each other was doing. And I remember, early on, because I came from that background of looking, I was always really concerned about what was important enough or interesting enough that I felt a resonance with to make the work. But I also was, it felt like it had to be something real in the world. It didn't feel like something that I could invent and pull out of nowhere. In my work, I'm interested in that kind of experiential thing. I'm interested in time, and I'm interested in how perception changes over time. But all of that in connection to something that seems like a tangible thing, but that is constantly fleeting, And so in the work, I really want the work to have that sense of it's both there and almost not there. So this is a picture of me and two of my friends in high school. I moved out when I was 16 because I was so serious about painting, and it was the only way I could keep going to this high school to keep an address in that neighborhood. So I started oil painting when I was 16. So I was painting in my room. You can see in the background, there's lots of tapes and records. Music was like a huge portal for me. I started paying attention to music really young, but by the time I was 13, I started listening to punk music, and that really opened up the whole world for me. Because other than that, I didn't have a lot of exposure to culture outside of, my immediate life where I was in Memphis, which wasn't that broad. And I also had been influenced by a friend of mine's mother who was a practicing artist. Her name was Deborah Brown, and she later married, and it was Deborah Collins, then Deborah Brown. But she was an artist. She lived her life as a graphic designer. Her whole living room was the studio, and she made things that made me really want to make things. It felt like the first time I saw paintings in real life, and thought about art. But I didn't get so exposed to artists from her, other than artists in Memphis. But through my high school art teacher, I was exposed pretty early on to people like Lucian Freud, Frank Auerbach, all the modernists, Matisse, Picasso, de Kooning, abstract expressionism, all that stuff we were just drinking in, and Bay Area figurative painters. Those are all people I was looking at early on, and some of them really stayed. I'm not going to show any undergrad work, but this was a print that I did in high school, just to give you a sense of, my connection to the mundane, and, something that I could grab onto that was immediately around me and find something about it that I could respond to. At Norfolk, I met Gideon Bach, who was a painter there as a grad student at the time. And it was really eye-opening to be in a place with, I was going to an art school in Boston, but it felt like the level of seriousness of everyone at Norfolk was like on another level. And Gideon's paintings in particular really inspired me. And the first conversation we had about painting, he was asking what I was interested in. I said, I'm interested in movement. And he was like, me too. And so we became friends, and I had a real hard time painting there. I would go out, it was like kind of like this. It was pastoral and beautiful. And I didn't want to make those kind of landscape paintings. And I was making a lot of urban landscapes in Boston before I was there. And I just didn't know what to do with it. But one day we were driving around, and we came across this fairground that had been hit by a tornado. And it to me was like standing inside of a de Kooning painting, but I could look at it and I could respond to it. And I was also looking a lot at these Picassos. I looked at a lot of different artists throughout, my time studying, but I really liked about these Picassos the compression of the space, and the feeling that there's these layers that you can see as separate things but work together in the layers. And also this something about almost a slight misregistration feeling about the things, like a slight feeling of shifting underneath or time in them. This is the last painting I did in undergrad after I went back after Norfolk. And I was definitely thinking through looking at Gideon's paintings. And I was painting these from life. I had this studio in Kenmore Square. It overlooked a 5-way intersection, and it was amazing. And what I loved about it was I couldn't hold it still. And it was something that seemed impossible to try to grab and make a painting of. And I had been doing a lot of like going out and looking for subject and taking photos and working from photos. But it was really when I was the problems that presented themselves from working from life, from those aspects of it, were really what my work later became about. But I think also I was always compelled by taking something that was not beautiful at all and finding a way to make it beautiful. And this is a jump ahead. So this was probably 1996, and this is 2002. I was getting ready to apply for grad school. I took 8 years out between undergrad and grad school, and I was looking a lot at Philip Guston. And I was still compelled by the bleakness of the urban, or the sort of the landscape at the strip mall culture that was around me. I grew up in Memphis. I went to undergrad in Boston. I biked across Europe. I moved back to Boston. I tried to live in Chicago. I landed in Memphis again. Then I lived in Asheville, North Carolina. Then I did a seasonal cranberry harvest for a couple of years. And then I lived in rural Tennessee. And I was making this painting in rural Tennessee outside of Memphis. And I started to really question what I could get from the photos. It felt like a limitation, and I had big questions about what it meant, because I was editing and taking aspects of different things and putting them together. And I was always interested really in something that happened in the paintings that was not anything to do with the image, that was like the painting event. And I started looking around my world again as as much as sometimes I don't know the impetus for the subject, I'm always questioning it to some degree. But I started painting my bed, and this comes back as a subject later. But this was like probably a 6 foot tall painting. And there was an element of time that came into it. My ex you can see a silhouette of his body under the sheet on the right. And sometimes I would paint him as being in the bed, but then he wouldn't be there. Other times I was painting, so I would keep going. I went to the University of Washington in Seattle for grad school, and I studied with Denzel Hurley and Riley Brewster and Ann Gale and Helen O'Toole. And they all were great critics and really tough, challenging people, in different ways. And when I went into grad school, I was really questioning my relationship to working from observation, and if it was something that I had inherited from the people I had worked with. And I really worked from invention and process and non-referentially for most of the time in grad school until my last quarter. But the thing that allowed me to do was to really take apart how I was doing things and what was habitual and what was actually an interesting problem to deal with. So I didn't want to make paintings about my studio, but I wasn't going to go out and paint in the landscape either at that time. And it confounded me. So I had this mirror in my studio that I just had the impulse to grid off with these 2-inch squares with masking tape. And then I just started looking at what that space was like and how the slightest shift would shift everything happening in the cells and kind of just undo what I expected to see there, or where I expected to find it. So I started making paintings from that. And I also was having I had this heavy-handed, neutral, dark colored palette for a long time. And I changed my surface. The person I shared a wall with, we could talk over the wall, is the painter. Her name is Kimberly Trowbridge. And we were kind of felt like painting siblings working together in that space, and bouncing ideas, back and forth. But she had, talked to me saying that she used oil ground. And I thought, why would I spend so much time being so precious about the surface if I'm just going to bury it? But it changed my painting so much because I started to, I really started to just pay attention to the material and using different mediums. The paint got really transparent, and now I won't paint on gesso at all. It's always oil ground. And I just felt like I was letting go of a lot of things and able to just have a relationship with what was being made and not feel like I had to force where it was going to be driven, like to really figure out what the work could be. And then I moved to rural Arkansas to teach, and I set up a studio in my house. I was really happy to be in a situation where I could paint and not have someone looking over my shoulder, and not feel like I had to justify anything. And I started making this painting in my bed, which is probably 72 inches tall, and it's titled Everything is Germinal. So I think this painting is probably from 2007. I think 2007. And I don't know if it's clear from looking at the image, but it's a painting of my bed. And I started to bring in some things that were a little more recognizable, but I was painting the bed as it changed every day. Obviously we were sleeping in the bed, so nothing would be in the same place. And I felt like I was giving myself permission to bring some things in that were recognizable, that I also felt could represent something symbolic in terms of something that had the potential for growth, basically, or for information. And, having the idea of a place that you dream, a plant, and a book containing information, all those things just seem like essentials, like pretty bare essentials to me. And the title of the painting comes from a quote or a sentence in a Gaston Bachelard book called The Poetics of Space. And the quote was, "When a dreamer can reconstruct the world from an object that he transforms magically through his care of it, we become convinced that everything in the life of a poet is germinal." And when I read it, I was like, oh yes, of course, I don't have to go around having this big idea about what it's about necessarily. It can be found out through the making of it, and that potential for germination, it's it could be found anywhere, So it just felt like, okay, I can get over whatever chip I'm carrying around and I can make some work. So I moved into this studio, which I inhabited for 8 or 9 years in Fayetteville, that had south-facing windows. And I lived in Fayetteville for 9 or 10 years, and that's the longest I've lived in a single place. And that studio is the longest place I've inhabited, house or studio-wise, in my life. So there was this like layer of continuity and connection to existing and experiencing through continuity in the same space, and getting to know the seasons and light, and also having to come back to the subject and renew it and find something about it. There's this constant challenge of what else can I find here? And this painting is titled Something Else, and it's all my large paintings are basically my size. I can reach all over the whole surface without climbing a ladder. Sometimes I'll make them a little bit bigger than that, but usually it's like I like to be able to reach all over the surface. So I started thinking about, like, this one has different points of view. You can see in the foreground, there's 4 locations of these plants in the foreground. And that was not something I just decided to do. It's kind of something that happened as I was working. And then it started to be seasonal. Like, I would go on a walk and pick things from outside and put them in this cup, and then they would die. And so it's just how these different states of things in bloom or in decay. And this one's titled More of This. And same, it's a very large painting, at least 64 is, sometimes there's between 64 and 72 inches tall. And I was really interested in just the kind of space that could happen in the painting that was different than exactly how things are in the world, but comes from it, like it's fed from it. So it was like the paintings could have potential for being, a parallel reality. So this one is a smaller one, probably 32 inches tall. And I felt like everything, anytime I'd start to notice something being like a repetition, like if everything feels like it's expanding, I would try to, if I test it and go the opposite direction. So this one's a kind of contracting thing to the center. And this is a detail. This is a drawing I did. It's an 8-foot tall drawing called Listening to the Anarchy Hour. And drawing is something that I feel like I can deal with memory and not looking, and I can reconstruct things through memory. So this was reconstructed through a memory I had of a room when I was 13 and 14 years old that didn't have windows. Because it had rooms on all sides, there's no space for windows. So the ceiling was extra tall, and it had a window at the very top, but you couldn't look out the window other than seeing like a square sky or sometimes the moon, and there was something like that drove me crazy. Like I fantasized all the time. Like I just want to build a platform up there and just go up there and look out that window. But in that room, I listened to punk music. That's like the room where like the world expanded, and there was a punk show that used to come on called the Anarchy Hour. So it's titled after that, but the viewer doesn't need to know that. But I liked that there's no color in it, and that I would, strategize building a space without drawing a line, but using like the edge, the overlap of the paper to imply the line. And this is a close up. And in the tape player is Husker Du. I recorded over a Madonna tape, Husker Du's double LP in Arcade, which I still have. It's like this artifact of my life that I love very much. But that record has all these elements in it that relate to things that I think about painting. There's like a complexity of layering. There's all these things happening at once. There's a way that structure holds things together. And there's also what feels like exciting chaos and dissonance. And then it sometimes comes back together. This is a small painting from a memory of that same room. It's called Take Care of the Past. And this is a collage I did at the same time. So this is transparent waxed masa paper. So you're seeing it with light passing through it. And it's probably 30 inches tall, something like that. And I was at a residency in Pennsylvania, actually. It's a place called Soaring Gardens. If you're ever looking for residencies to apply for, that's a kind of good one. Do you know about that one? Yeah. It's very self-driven. And this is from the same residency. It's called Current Compass Radiostatic. There are things that happen in the paintings that I have initial impulse, and then I have to go inside the painting for a long time. And I work on them. Usually, I was at this residency for 2 months, but I usually work on large paintings for 10 months to a year. I'll have several going, and I'll usually work on them in sections of the day, like maybe 4 hours when the light is like this, and 4 hours when the light is like this. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it'll be at any point in the day. It just depends on where I'm at in the painting and what I want to deal with and what's making me crazy, and I have to get in there. But when I was making this painting, there was this thing that happened with this diamond shape that I got really interested in, and how there were these implied echoes of that shape moving out in the space. And I really liked that it had this feeling of the visual becoming like the sound, and that it was like synesthesia, that visual echo could relate to sound echo. And I think it's 50 inches tall, maybe 60 inches, 50 inches, I think. And this one's titled Listening to the Anarchy Hour. And I'm going to move a little bit faster so we can have time for the more current work. And so this is going back to my space in Arkansas. And this is probably a 50-inch on the long side kind of painting. And, I would return again and again to this corner of my studio where I had put a bed in front of a window. And I just kept trying to find out what else I could find out there. And eventually the light became a more active part of the painting, and it opened up a way that I could think about time and also allow it to evolve inside the paintings, so that they really developed into something else. So this is the first painting I think I did that was so directly dealing with that south-facing light. And it's similar to what I was saying about the painting that I was doing in Boston with the traffic, the intersection of traffic. The thing that you can't hold on to, that transience thing that's always getting away from you. So the light became that. And this is a 62-inch painting, and it's from probably 2008, 9, 10, around that time. And they kept going. This is also the same size. And I started, I had this image of Cézanne in my room by my bed. And I often do this where I put a reproduction of a painting by my bed without any expectations, but I like to look at them when my mind isn't totally clear, and I can ask questions that might seem stupid or obvious that I might not have been aware to ask of it. And, you just kind of like ingest the work. It just kind of becomes rooted inside of you. And that, I felt like that happened with this Cézanne painting, and partially in this composition in this painting. And then in this painting, it all feels very connected to me, but this is titled Faldum, and it's a 62-inch painting. And it's titled after a short story by Hermann Hesse, which you should read if you're interested, but it's from his book of fairy tales. And I'm going to say more about it, so I have more time for other things, but it all relates. The mountain, the idea of sound, and the Cézanne. These are just close-ups. And the thing that I really wanted to have happen, and these are not great images of the painting, is I wanted your eye to be able to choose of all of these things happening in the space. Like you could go in or you could come back up to the surface and you would kind of see through things. And this one's titled Low Hum. It's probably 52-inch squared, maybe a little larger. And again, I felt like the light just kept being such an interesting thing to track every day. I would be in the studio and watching, depending on the season, I'd know exactly what time of day I needed to come in for the light to do the thing it did. And watching it move across this bed, and it just kept feeling like a landscape, like it's like light on top of the ripple of a surface of water. And I like that the radio continues to be this thing in there that could point to the idea of sound or for transformation. I feel like it has the potential for something like that. But I also felt like I was like a little bit like trying to unlock things from stasis, and this painting's titled Wolf Interval, and it's 64 inches tall, so it's my body size. And I think this one was one that started to get to that kind of other space. And wolf interval is a musical term, and my understanding of it is that it has to do with dissonance, where when these two sounds are about to harmonize, there's something that's out of tune about it, which was something I was thinking about in relation to the light, because I would be painting this at the end of the day when everything was about to flip from daytime to nighttime. And so all of the contrast would completely reverse, and it was completely dissonant, and it was complete chaos, but I loved that I could do that I could just embrace that and try to deal with it in the painting. And then other things I would get stuck, and I would do simple things like take a walk in the painting, where I would take steps back from where I was normally looking and then start painting the whole painting again. And so these are details, but I get most excited about when the paintings, they get unlocked in a way. And I feel like I could reach my hand into the space and I believe it, but it's also about to pull apart again. Like there's this interesting, almost hallucinatory sensation of the forms floating in light, And this is just like showing you a little bit of how the painting changes. And this is another my body size painting. It's titled Delay. And I started to move away from the bed and to look more out the window or to look more at the space. And every once in a while I include figures. This is a painter friend, Sarah Norsworthy. And I only really paint people I know well, and usually people that will come sit in my studio while I work. So there's this like intimate exchange, which was part of that painting, Falden. That's the same person in that painting. In 2012, I was invited by Robert Bunkin, who was curating at the Staten Island Museum, to be part of a show called Staten Island Scene, but I had never been there. So I called up my friends and I was like, who do you know that I got to figure out how I'm going to be in Staten Island and rent a room and make a painting there. And luckily my friend was friends with people who had a house, and some of them were going out of town. So I subletted their room and I transformed it into where I was painting for a couple of months. And I did this painting in 2 months, which was really short for me. And I appreciated having that limitation because it allowed the painting to stay a little more open. So this one is, again, probably that 64 inches on the long side. And I was thinking somewhat about I think that like thinking about Northern Renaissance paintings and the position of a window in a Northern Renaissance painting, we're thinking about the role of light in those paintings and how it alludes to some idea about a message being delivered or some other symbolic things. I was thinking about those things. The person in the painting that you can't see because they got dissolved is a person who's known in the punk world for writing zines and being in bands. And I was planning to incorporate them, but they couldn't pose enough to develop them. So they dissolved, but just having the presence lingering with these other kind of artifacts that come from that subculture that I've grown up in and been in my whole life. I liked that idea of portraits of people that aren't famous, but are part of the world, This is a detail. And this was a box that I filled with dirt and grew weeds in. And at the time my dog was dying she was very old and I knew she was dying soon. So it was like dog grave size. And this is a detail. And that's probably a 50-inch painting. And this is a painting titled Cosmos. I every once in a while get to go painting outside. And this was in my backyard when I lived in Arkansas. And I love gardening, and there's always a point in the cycle of the garden that I can't bear to impose my will on it. So I let it do what it does, and it flourishes, and I'm in awe of how chaotic it is. And I get excited about getting lost. I mean, that's one of the things I just love about finding something in the world to get inside of, is that I can get completely lost in it. So if you look closely at this painting, there's a chair in the middle that's like a lawn chair, and then this fragment of a mirror, and there's a tiny self-portrait, almost like a child in the chair. That's a detail. And that's me painting in the garden. And the flowers are definitely taller than me. And I have some flowers in my garden now that are also taller than me and just starting to bloom. So I'm probably going to try to tackle them soon. And I'm going to move through these a little bit faster so we can get to the more recent stuff. So all of these are large scale paintings. This one's probably an 80-inch tall painting. And it's called Radiant Welter. This is like a 20-inch square self-portrait. And this is probably a 12-inch tall painting. It's titled Ecstatic Static. 12-inch probably. So this one's called Discordant Wave. And this was one that I felt like really pushed beyond something that I felt like I didn't hold back. I felt like the painting went to, if there were knobs that you could turn to maximize the intensity, I felt like this did it the most by this point. And it's a very hard painting to take a picture of, but I feel like when you're standing in front of it, it's just like so many layers. And that's, my process is I'm using a really fast drawing medium that I mix Galkid, like an alkyd based medium, in with a basic medium that I make myself. And then I can layer over it the next day without any kind of, weirdness at the surface. And I don't mask anything. I put it directly on the canvas, and then I sometimes manipulate. People always ask about that, so I'll just answer it. And this is just so you can see the way that they evolve and how drastically they change. And there's always many points along the way that I think, well, that looks like a painting. I could stop, but I feel like I do have to keep going until it's arrived at something that I am surprised by and I am like excited about, and feel like I don't already know it, which could be maybe not as good of a painting in some ways, but I think it's really important to keep pushing towards that. So these are details. And I'm going to run through these. These are just drawings based on the memory of that room. This is a really large painting, probably 8 feet in length. I had to rent a U-Haul to move that one. And these are details. And there's just certain elements in my studio that become like players. They keep repeating. It's part of the universe of the paintings. And I was taping these transparent letters to the window for a while. This one's called Angels Are Dreaming of You. It's probably 52 inches tall. It's a reference to a song by Sonic Youth. And it's a tiny painting, probably 12-inch. This one's titled Hearing Sense Self Confound, and it's 20 inches, I think. I did a residency in France at a place called Camac that doesn't exist anymore, and it's in a town called Marnay-sur-Seine, and it's on the Seine, and it's in a 500-year-old monastery, which had these this orchards. And when I was there, it was early spring, and so all the grounds were covered in this carpet of blooming flowers, like little primroses and other things, and it was amazing. It was so beautiful. And I had shipped my paints over thinking it would be easier than risking not being familiar with whatever paint I found there. But the paint didn't get to me till maybe a week before my residency was over. So luckily there was like leftover materials that other artists had left, and there was cheap paper and blacking. So I started just going out and doing these ink drawings, and then bringing back the pieces and then reconstructing them into its own world in the drawing. And it was such a fun process, and I loved having the opportunity to do that. And I'm always wanting to do it again. This was looking out my window to the village where I was. And I started to play with color at the end because I got my hands on some colored ink, but these pieces later became part of a different collage that I'll show you. And then I took a teaching job in New York, and I moved into an apartment in Staten Island. And since I've moved to New York in 2016, my studio has been in the place that I've lived, and I've moved 3 times now. So this is the first studio which overlooked the harbor from Staten Island looking to the city. So I could see a little bit of New Jersey, the whole bottom of Manhattan, and then a big portion of Brooklyn. And I could see the whole water, expansive water, and it was amazing. And I also would get the sunrise in that window. So it was really, in one way, very challenging to try to adapt to everything being so different. Like my whole goal when I was looking for places was south facing light. That's my first priority. And I looked for so long and I didn't end up finding what I wanted, but also south facing light was something through the window that I cared about, that I really wanted to think about. This one's titled Voyager, and it's like the large size, 70 inches, 64 inches. These are details. I've got this curtain that I got at a thrift store in Pennsylvania when I did that residency that's got this wonderful pattern that looks like the kind of geometrical patterns you would see on a wall in a Giotto painting. And it's in a lot of my paintings since I found it, which was, 2009 or something. These are just details of that painting. And this one's titled iCloud, and it's probably this was these paintings were in my last solo show at Stephen Harvey Signal. And so this one's, I was thinking about it sort of like an enunciation of a broken heart. I have all these things on the wall that are ephemera, that some have personal significance and some just have the potential for pointing to something, like a bird wing. There's several things. There's like a little navigation chart for stars. There's a reproduction of a meadowlark leaving the nest, which is an image that I've been painting a lot over and over. And then also on the bottom right-hand side, there's a bottle of water, a pitcher of water, and the cover of an Otis Redding record. And if you listen to Otis Redding, you probably know the song, "You Don't Miss Your Water Till the Well Runs Dry." So I was married for 13 years and we had split up, and it just felt like this sobering, self-reflective painting and I'm from Memphis, and my ex is from Memphis, and Otis Redding recorded its Dax record in Memphis. So there's always layers that it's just all connected to that. But also just thinking about the history of painting and thinking about it, the role of light in Annunciation paintings and how it's signifying, this thing that you're being told of the future. But here I'm thinking more in the Nidas way of mortality or loss, or, loss of beauty, aging, all these things, like lots of layers. So that's a close-up. And another detail. And that's the meadowlark on the left that you maybe can see. This one's called Moonrise, and it's also from that Staten Island apartment. And I just really like the idea that I could start to think about time, light, natural phenomena, the spectrum of light. That's a close-up. This one's called Diamond Light. I'm proud I'm remembering all the titles this time, because the last time I was forgetting some of them. And these are all 64 to 70 inches tall. And these are all in that show Signal. These are details of that painting. This was called Searcher, and it's a painting that I started when I was at the residency in France for that last week or two that I had my paint. And then I brought it back with me and continued it in this new space. I had 2 speakers that were on site at the residency, and then I went out and dug a clump of dirt and I put it between the 2 speakers, and that was what I was painting for a while. And this is also 20 inches by 20 inches and same time period. This collage is called Moonshine, and it started out as an 8-foot tall collage, which had a completely reversed time of day and color situation going on, but I narrowed it down. I totally revised it, and it became this one, which is probably 5 feet square, but it was relating to the moonrise painting. And this is a very tiny little collage of that reproduction of the meadowlark leaving the nest. This one's called Satellites. And this is from the next space that I was in Bushwick. And I was thinking a lot about, I'd come from a place that was completely overgrown and somewhat wild. I had land in Arkansas, and then I rented a place in town, because it was close to where I worked. And that was also in 40 acres, which was completely wild around it. So I was so used to wilderness and these things around me to remind me that the natural world is huge and will overtake things. And so I was just filling up my apartments in New York with plants. And I noticed that I wanted to, look at scale change from the plants being really large and in scale in comparison to these tiny little man-made things. So you can see like back here, the tiny little building, or down here, there's the tiny little satellite. But also thinking about like how the plants move to follow the light, what the satellite's doing in relationship to information being bounced around in space, and then what the eye is doing as it's tracking around, all these relationships of things that track, things that are trying to give and receive information. And this painting is called Where the Tongue Can't Follow, and it's like 50 by 64. So again, I was thinking really about landscape, but inside and constructed in a way. So having this horizontal format and this mirror on the table is almost like a little body of water. And this painting started in Staten Island. So there's elements in it of when I was there, and then elements in the new space. And these are details. And you can see again that geometric pattern of the curtain being in there again. I think I titled it Sliver Moon. But again, the scale change of what's close to you and in your intimate space, or like nature swallowing up the city. And these are little small paintings that I've been doing in my studio this past year. They're 8 by 8. The next few are 8 by 8, and just some objects that I have in the studio. And a lot of them, I started to get interested in these flat shapes that are on a tilted plane, and especially these ones that are referencing the natural world. There's a lot of that in the paintings that I'm working on right now. And I've also been looking a lot at the unicorn tapestries that are at the cloisters at the Met, and I'm completely confounded and in love with these, but especially this painting, or this tapestry. It's such a complex composition. It's such a fun thing to draw from. And I keep going back to it again and again and again. And I'm always amazed at what I'm finding out about how it's made, and the strangeness of the space. It's just such a beautiful object. But I was doing these drawings from it, but there's something about the ornate quality of the forms that I feel like is definitely influencing how I'm thinking about that patterning of things. And then I started to make a mirrored image of one half of the tapestry. And it's interesting how it just totally changed the narrative and made it into, instead of this guy being a hunter, it's now this like self-reflective thing. And then you start thinking about like, what are you hunting for? And it's more about a relationship with yourself. And then the unicorn gets away because it's not even in there anymore. But I love exploring that tapestry. So this is a painting that's probably 50 inches tall, and I don't think it's finished yet, but it's still going. These are details. That snarling dog is this fence sign that's like a stay out guard dog sign that I really love. And this is a painting that's my height, and it's been the view of my studio looking into the backyard. And this was my get me through winter painting, everything dying down and the trees being bare. Really, my palette feels like it's changing a lot. And I haven't been totally sure about if I'm ready to stop or not on these. That's a detail. And I also am trying to paint my cats, but they are not cooperating. I have this other painting that's really new that he's into, but I didn't bring it, sorry. But that's the end. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you talk about like your process of painting?
How I start? Well, I'm gripped with a lot of anxiety and I walk around wringing my hands until I find something that I think, okay, that's like a way in, you know? And I don't really know how I start other than that. That's my starting point. And once I'm in, I'm fine. It's just the anxiety of where I'm going to commit to, you know? And then the paintings are really layered. And when they're layered, I don't conceal what happened before. And there's always, like, if you're looking at the paintings, you'll always be able to see down to the first layer. So it's almost like lace on top of lace on top of lace.
There's a related question on Zoom that maybe gets a little bit more technical about it, but how do you create / paint so many layers while maintaining that translucency?
I use a lot of transparent pigments. And if things get too lost, I also use like opaque and transparent color. So sometimes it's an opaque thing. Sometimes I knit it back in with something transparent. Sometimes if something gets too built in a certain way that I don't like, I can put an opaque thing and then go back over that again. So I think that answers the question. I'm not sure.
I was thinking you referred to the.
Well, I don't think that the narrative is something, I think it's oblique. You know, I don't think it's something that's like a linear thing that you'd be like, it's about a story, you know, unless the story is you seeing through my experience of time and perception. You know, I feel like that if there is a story, there's that. I mean, the painting iCloud that I was talking about with the Otis Redding reference and all of those other elements, like that one does have a narrative. I feel like there's a lot of symbolism in it. But they're not usually that pointedly clear in a narrative way. You know, a lot of time it's like, there's one painting I didn't talk about that's a horizontal painting of the bed, and it's like a silvery kind of gray color, and the shapes in it, I titled it Moth just because it had that feeling of like the dust off of a moth's wings, but also the kind of erratic path it flies in. I don't know if that's a narrative, but it's an association. And I feel like a lot of the things are associations, and I don't think that they're often easy to verbalize. And that's why I get drawn to them, because it's something that's really, I think, hard to put into words. It's more felt, you know?
I was wondering if you could talk about the difference in your experience, if any, between painting from life and reconstructing from memory, like Soaring Gardens.
The first question about the difference between looking and working from memory. I mean, I think there's a reason why I'm not using color in the things that are about memory. I feel like when I'm looking, I'm overwhelmed with phenomena, and I want to be receiving that kind of information. And it's not like I'm taking it all in without having a problem I'm dealing with, or taking some things and leaving other things, you know. But I would love to be able to do something different, but it's just it's not how I work. It's not like I've tested it and I've tried it really like very openly and wholeheartedly, but I felt a little bit like I was in a void and it didn't make sense to me. So I just really try now to do what, I don't even know how to say it. It's like you resonate with something and you trust it. It's not something you know, but it's something that you trust. That's all I know how to say about it. You know, it's in terms of defending your work, I think it's important to think about it critically. And I think it's important to do a lot of reading and writing and processing how you're thinking about ideas. But I think in the end, for me, the kind of painter that I am is a painter that is making work from my experience, and there's something humble about it. And I don't know how do you justify that? I don't know, but that's where I come from. And so at some point you kind of reconcile that this is who you are as a painter, and you're going to believe in it, and you're going to like trust, take one foot in front of the other, you know. Hopefully that answers. I don't think it does, but I think that the kind of challenge you get in grad school is like, I think you should let yourself be pressed very hard by it. And what survives it is what's going to be interesting, you know?
Hi.
Hi.
Can you explain the title of the talk?
Oh, I've never titled a talk before, and Jay said we have to have a title. So I have a sticker on my refrigerator that's an oven with its door open that's for an appliance repair place that says all questions answered. And I think it's hilarious because it looks like the oven is this oracle. And so I always think about like, it's like this Swami or something, like, who is this oven and what are they going to tell me? But I think that things should retain some mystery. You know, I think sometimes I tell too much, but I also really respect things that have, and you know, they can't be totally explained. Not that I want to avoid answering, but I think in the end, some things just probably aren't going to be as explicable as people want.
Thank you. Pretty well. Good questions. Thank you, Stephanie.
Sure.